When we look at our communities, we should be disappointed in their current state. We should ask ourselves, why? How did we get here? And how can we remedy this situation? This current neighborhood environment is not conducive to building the community that we want. We have come to see that the common denominator is fatherless homes with resultant out-of-control crime and failing schools. Our crime-riddled communities is no place for businesses, so there's just a cycle of poverty and despair and unemployment. We constantly ask ourselves, how do we solve this problem? How do we address this? When experts gather, there's always someone diagnosing the problem. We ask ourselves constantly, how did we get here? Our controversial answer is normally slavery. Slavery, which ended in 1860s, is normally blamed for this problem. This video is not meant to take away from the fact that slavery harmed our people, but this video also encourages us to move on. The discussion of slavery sends us into the circular discussion. Now we move on to segregation and Jim Crow. Those were terrible years for our people, and we must never minimize the impact that it had on us. Separate water fountains, separate schools, redlining. This was a horrible part of our history. But now we have to move on, and we have to evaluate that we have had 50 years. It is not meant for us to catch up. It is not meant for us to be equal, but we should be progressing as a people, and we should never accept dilapidation and crime-riddled communities as thriving. It is not even surviving. It is time for us to look at what the problem is, the current problem. Although it's not normally discussed, 23% of the population lives the dream. They live in a world that they are able to support themselves and their families to enjoy lives similar to the rest of the upper middle class in this country. We must never forget this. In 2016, we see that the wealth gap between black and white is significant. The average white family was able to save $150,000, while the black family only $13,000. Then we look at the difference between earnings, $70,000 for the white family, while the black household income fell to $41,000. This is a glaring difference, something that we need to look at to see why are incomes falling? Why are they not rising? This is something that if we don't address, then we will keep falling behind. The black family was better off in 2000. Why are incomes falling? What has happened? With falling incomes and dilapidated communities, which is crime-riddled with gang activity, it is so difficult for our children to prosper. We owe it to them to improve their standard of living and their environment. It should be no mystery why our women are upset. They have to raise our children, in many cases, without father involvement. These crime-riddled areas are unsafe for them and their children. With the failing schools and the constant gang recruitment, they are in a war zone. The women of the community are justifiably angry. They have to live in unsafe neighborhoods. They have to face the prospect that our children, are actively being recruited by gangs. They are looking to the men to find solutions, and they are visibly and audibly upset. We should not look on them and ridicule them based on the way that they look. We should listen to the substance of their argument. And I would call it, we need to do some soul searching. We need to not look at the messenger, but evaluate the message. Are we failing? Modern man has been asked to do three main things. The 3 Ps. provide, protect, and problem solve. Are we doing these things? Let's ask ourselves, are we good providers? I look back at what has happened over these last 50 years as we emerge from segregation. And we need to take a real evaluation of where we are. I don't think we are good providers as a collective, and that's something that we have to work on. We'll address this later in our video, but we should ask ourselves this question seriously. We really have to evaluate our role as fathers, sons, brothers, and husbands. Are we fulfilling those roles appropriately? Do we see room for improvement? That's something that we have to do as we do this. In the 80s, our role model as black young men was Bill Cosby and The Cosby Show. That was a peek into a functioning, fictional, but functioning black family. We need to look back at this. As flawed as Bill Cosby was, we should not throw away what he provided or the producers provided in that show. That template still works. So let's look at it.
Maybe you can just accept who I am and love me anyway. Because I'm your son.
Theo, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my life. There's no wonder you get D's and everything. Now, you are afraid to try because you're afraid that your brain is going to explode and it's going to ooze out of your ears. Now, I'm telling you, you are going to try as hard as you can. And you're going to do it because I said so. I am your father. I brought you in this world, and I'll take you out.
As we move from the 80s into the 90s, what we saw that there were real prophets of those days, and I consider John Singleton to be one of those prophets. He saw the impending danger. In the early 90s, he produced Boys in the Hood. This was a tale of a young man growing up in the hood with a father where everyone else did not have that father involvement. It was social commentary that was done expertly, but it was a harbinger of things to come. He went on to Menace to Society. When he did Menace to Society, it was a darker tale. It was showing you what a hood psychopath would look like. Someone who did not care about safety of anyone, including themselves. This was a very, very dark tale, and it was something that he was trying to communicate to Gen X and also their parents, the boomers, that something wrong, something was brewing in the hood that needed careful attention. Then he went on to show what was happening to the women in the community, how they were being betrayed and they were being let down by the men. This was the tale of Baby Boy, Jody. This young man was the first implementation of the 90s Dusty. He had 2 baby mothers. He was constantly at risk of getting a third. We saw Yvette in that show as the woman who was bouncing around with a baby father and a former boyfriend who was in prison. This was the life that women had, and she was not alone. There were realistic representations of Yvette's in the hood. The common theme was the scarcity of the father involvement. And without the father being involved, there was always instability. These were just fictional tales. But our evening news shows us that these are not really too far from reality, and something that needs to be solved. I repeat, slavery was serious for our people, but we need to move forward and look at what is happening today that is causing so many fathers to be absent. This has created somewhat of an epidemic within the hood, something that cannot be ignored. And what we end up with is the hood psychopath, the misguided youth, the dusty who has several baby mothers, and also the habitual criminal who creates nothing but havoc within his neighborhood. And then we have the woman, the heroine, the strong black woman, and they are not to be left without blame, but they are looking to their men for leadership to move the hood from where it is today. Quietly, several people have been leaving the hood. They have been moving to greener pastures in the suburbs. They are trying to make a better life for themselves. But what have they left behind? This is reminiscent of the early 1900s when there was a great migration of blacks from the south into the industrial north. On a smaller scale, this migration is happening. People are divesting from the hood. The great challenge is the mentality, the hood mentality. Marcus Garvey and Bob Marley popularized the term emancipate yourself from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our minds. And one of the things that we need to recognize is the hood mentality will affect anyone's life no matter where they go. So let's examine that mentality. That mentality not only lives in the hood, but it lives wherever it is practiced. I remember when my children were toddlers, they would go into one room and make a mess. When it became overwhelming, they'd move to another room and make another mess. And I noticed they just kept moving to different rooms making a mess. How we solved that was to go to the original mess and get it tidied up. The original mess is the hood. That problem needs to be solved. And that is not with more funding and more programs. It will come through people recognizing their own personal responsibility and their own right to individuality. That is how we can attempt to solve this problem. Our parents and children need to understand the importance of school. It is so sad to go into a community with a failing school and disengaged students. This is so disheartening, as this is the way these students can lift themselves out of poverty when they become adults. This is the gateway into the professions, whether they be skilled trades or academia. This is a wide open door to the middle class. Let us look at how we can get these students more engaged. This is a travesty that these students are allowed to waste their opportunity. What we have seen is that failing students are more susceptible to gangs, recruitment drives. Our children are being recruited into prostitution, sex trafficking, becoming gangbangers, and many of them are being plied with drugs like fentanyl, heroin, crack. This is everyone's problem, something that needs to be solved. But as I said, not by a program, but parents. We have to try our best to get our children re-engaged in schoolwork and education, because this is their ticket to not only escape the hood, but for those who have escaped the hood, to stay in the suburbs. Because as black parents, we know, and the statistics shows, that sometimes our children fall back into the hood after a generation of being in the suburbs. This is because, as we said, the hood mentality is not something that lives in the hood. It is something that is practiced. And we have to figure out how to stop our children from practicing this hood mentality. We will look at this in further detail in subsequent videos, but this has far-reaching implications beyond the hood. With the availability of the internet, now millions of teens are being indoctrinated with the hood mentality through the music. This music has been imitating life, and life has been imitating this art. Something that we need to look into. I don't propose that we ever stop the music, but there has to be a competing voice to tell our children that this lifestyle will lead them down the wrong path. When I grew up in the 90s, there was NWA, there was Tupac, there was Biggie. I can't forget watching Nothing But a G Thing and thinking Snoop Dogg enjoying life as a young man with nothing to do, a 40 ounce of liquor, a party, all the girls. But my father, he was there, and my mother, to instruct me of the path of how to become a man, a positive contributor to the society. My mother and father taught me that simply my role was to gain an education, to work hard at my schoolwork. Then I was supposed to transfer that passion and that determination to my job. Be humble. Be a good neighbor. Clean your yard. Take care of your responsibilities. And then one day, if you're lucky enough to get a wife, be faithful to her. And if you are blessed with children, do the honored thing and ensure that they are first in your life and that you are there to provide and protect and also to help them to problem solve. This was the lessons that I learned. Those lessons drowned out all the information that was being flowed to me from all the rap music, all the rock songs, all the debauchery. This is something that needs to be reinforced. Many of us are doing it today, but those who aren't, we need to take heed, and we need to do this now. For some of us, a dystopian future awaits us. If we allow this debauchery to continue, then we are just descending into the chaotic world of baby fathers, baby mothers, abandonment, failing schools, and then we move into budget deficits, and then the communities crumble, the roads crumble, and then we have, instead of advancing, we have regressed as a society. This is something to think about as we go forward. The responsibility lies with us, each of us, as parents, as students, as husbands, as wives. That responsibility lies with us. If we fail, we have but ourselves to blame.